Welcome to A Creative Affair. You're with Len Metcalf and Bree Stockwell this morning or this evening, depending where you are. And today we have a special guest, Aaron Martinez. And it's so wonderful to have you here. And actually, I'm going to throw straight over to Bree because they have much longer friendship. And I want to know who you are, Aaron, but Bree, why don't you introduce us?
I'm going to do it because we'll let Aaron talk about himself. But here's what I first want to say. So I met Aaron. When did I meet you? Like a year and a half ago? Or last year. Anyway, it hasn't been that long. I mean, I haven't been doing photography for that long even. So it's got to be within the past 2 years. So anyway, but Aaron moved here to Austin from El Paso, and he works at the Austin American Statesman paper, and Aaron will let you talk about that. But here's what I want to say is I think I have watched Aaron's work grow over the past year, and it just keeps getting better and better. And it's been my privilege to have a friendship with you, Aaron. But also I love that we've become friends and that we can just get together and share work with each other. I really think that if you out there don't have someone that you can share your work with in real life, that's really important. So that's one thing that I really appreciate about, having at least one person around that we can share work with. In fact, even today, I got my Lens journal, Len, that has my work in it.
Oh, how exciting. You must be over the moon to see that.
I am. And I barely peeked at it last night, and I handed it to Aaron. I'm like, Aaron, look at this. Open it. Check it out. Anyway, I forced it on him. But anyway, so Aaron, give us a little background, and I'll tell everyone what we're going to talk about in a minute, but give us a little background about you and about what you love in your work, and then also what you love in your paid work, but also what you love in your personal work.
Okay, well, I'll just start with a brief intro to myself then, I guess, is I work at the Austin American Statesman newspaper in Austin, Texas, one of the largest papers in the USA Today network. I've only been here for, just under 2 years, and shortly after I moved here, I met Bree. And, I guess what do I love about my work the most? Oddly enough, I'm an extreme introvert, so don't generally like people, crowds, group settings, whatever. But for some reason, when it comes to my job, meeting people is kind of the best part of it for me. And, getting to photograph interesting people, meet interesting people on a daily basis. That's really what attracted me to this career, despite being a huge introvert. And my personal work is, primarily nature photography, night photography, stuff like that. It's purely a hobby, something I do on the side for my own entertainment, not for anyone else. It's just, a good excuse to be outdoors at the very least.
I love that. And it's true. It is a good reason to get outdoors. And I guess that's how we met, is because of landscape photography. Because I don't know if you were purely only in the photojournalism world that our paths would have ever totally crossed, So awesome. Today, we're going to talk about the decisive moment. So the decisive moment it's kind of a term coined by Henri Cartier-Bresson, right? Who he has a book called The Decisive Moment. And actually the book, I don't own that book. It's really expensive. I can hear Momo. Hi, Momo. If my son comes home, you'll hear my dog too. And so he talks about this decisive moment being the moment. And Len, if you know more about this, you can correct me. But the moment when all these things come together, and so many just come together to make something interesting, whether it's in your camera frame, or it could even be in like paintings. I feel like the decisive moment translates to all different parts of art. And so I'm curious. That's what I want to talk about because I want to figure out what we all have to say about those things. What do you know, Len, or what thoughts do you have about the decisive moment?
It's one of those issues or ideas or concepts that's widely misunderstood and misinterpreted compared to what he was talking about at the beginning. And I'm not very good at describing what he was trying to say. Um, but how it's used in popular culture, it's considered as this moment that you choose to take the artwork. But he was talking about that, you're bringing the composition and all of these things together, uh, and make some incredibly beautiful captures. I think one of the interesting ones is that he's got that beautiful photograph of that gentleman about to make a big splash in a puddle as he steps across that water, and it's held up as this most amazing decisive moment photograph because it's right before the splash happens, as you can see him about to head down into the water. And yet, you know he was holding it up above or through a crack in a fence, and it was one of those really lucky moments by pressing the shutter. Uh, and it actually wasn't really that precise second when he pressed the shutter that he was timing or trying to work at in that sense. So maybe I've got that story wrong, but I think it's quite fascinating that it has so many different concepts around it. And I don't think we need to stick with the formal one today. I think we should just talk about this idea of when you take photographs and how they go with. So that's my take on it, Bree. Don't get too caught up in it personally.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Len knows I liked how we talked about before we all started recording. And I'm like, I like my list. I like doing research. And through this podcast, I've really had to relax all of that. And so sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I want the list. Like today, I kind of want a list, but it's all right. So, Aaron, I have noticed in your photography that we're going to let Aaron talk, but I have noticed in your photography that I'll see what you are posting and sharing or what goes out in the Statesman. And I'm like, that feels like the moment. Like so many times, like there's one I know we talked about, you're at a football game and there's, was it rain or what was going on in that one? At the Westlake football
The
game?
most recent?
No, the one at the end of the season, that coach's last game, and you kind of like wiggled your way into the middle of the crowd. In fact, we can talk about the decisive moment, like having to do with all of that. But anyway, tell me what your thoughts are, and maybe I'll pull up some of your photographs and we can talk about.
Well, see, in the context of that photo, a lot of elements collided to get me a photo. If anyone's wondering, it's here in Central Texas. There's a Westlake High School. There's a coach there that won 3 consecutive state championships. The last state championship he won was the last game of his career. I have a photo of him hoisting the trophy. It's literally the last photo of his coaching career. And when I got back to the photo workroom after shooting this football game, me and all the other photographers were all sharing, like just looking at each other's work and whatever. And, they all had photos of him hoisting the trophy from like above the players and from like behind him and from, all kinds of crazy angles. But I was literally trying to shove football players back because I got mobbed, and I was 2 feet away from him, trying to shoot at as wide as possible to get him hoisting the trophy. And it's probably one of my favorite photos. So in that case, the decisive moment was not only was I pointing the photo at the coach the moment he hoisted the trophy to yell, but I was the only one that was close enough to get that shot. So in that case, the decisive moment was just a bunch of different things colliding, being in the right place, being close enough, having the right lens, paying attention when he was going to hoist that trophy up and yell. And, that a lot went into that perfect shot, not just the moment, but, location, focal length. There's a lot that goes into, what you guys say is that decisive moment.
And by the way, we don't think that there has to be like the decisive moment, because I feel like in every scenario there can be multiple moments that tell a totally different story. Have you experienced that?
Absolutely. The decisive moment, I feel, is, I don't know if I like the wording of that, because moment implies moment, a split second or whatever. But, from genre to genre, like the decisive moment can be several minutes, or the decisive moment can be an 8,000th of a second, right? If you're talking like sports, for example, the best moment is when, as this moment that running back's hand contacts some other guy's helmet and starts pushing him to the ground. You want those action shots. You want the peak action, the moment that you can see all his effort and work through a single frame. On the other extreme, if you want to talk about a decisive moment, is the Milky Way lining up with some rock formation. You might have it in that spot for 2-3 minutes before the moment's gone. So it's funny. I think decisive moment is a little misleading, because a moment can vary in duration a lot.
Well, that's why he was talking about composition, wasn't he? And how we line things up and put everything together. And that, but it's such a handy term for talking about this moment when you do press the shutter, and we don't really have a good other alternative to describe that. I really love that idea that there's only a few controls, isn't there? It's where you stand, what do you put in the frame, and that includes the angle of view, and when do you press then you press the shutter, and uh, you might press it many times, and there's so many different answers to that, and each each answer gives us a different story, a different feeling, and a different mood.
It's funny how all those seem to, yeah, when it comes to capturing that moment, it's like the pressing the shutter button is step like 15 in the sequence, right? There's a lot leading up to getting that quote unquote perfect moment.
Getting to that shutter click and that particular moment, there's this huge build up, and what's happening for you at that time? As let's not talk about it as a moment. Let's talk it about being a state of mind uh, that you're in. I'm really interested in what's happening in this preparation to capturing this 1,000th of a second that you're talking about.
If you want to talk about what I do as a job, like the preparation for that moment can often start, weeks or months in advance. I can't just walk up to a game and walk in and start taking photos on the field. No, you have to apply for credentials. That's like step one, is to put an application. Then you get accepted, and then you have to get there, and you need to know the field and the time of day. There's a lot leading up to the moment you press that shutter button. And the whole time when I'm leading up, I'm usually just stressed, if I'm being honest, when it comes to just worrying about, because the golden moment doesn't mean a damn thing if I miss it, right? Because that's all I'm worried about, is I need to make sure I get that shot, and I need to in the context of sports, I need to know how a team plays. I need to know what kind of plays they like to do. I need to kind of watch players and see how they're moving and whatever, just to kind of pre-visualize what the decisive moment might possibly look like. And then if I capture it, awesome. If not, well, guess I need to try for another moment.
I wonder if it's while you were talking about that, Aaron, I wonder if it's now you're stressed, so this isn't necessarily flow. And Len and I have talked about flow before, but when you're in that space where you are like at like a sports event, or even like you have photos of like Willie Nelson at a concert,
Yeah.
when there's a lot of action and people going on around you, I'm wondering there's all these little factors. Like, you have to know your gear really well. You have to have experience This is why I think your work is getting better, because you have experience going, oh, that is going to be it. And so maybe part of it is you're stressed, but also you're on like hyper alert, right? Like,
Mhm.
and I'm curious, like, what is happening in your mind? Are you like seeing, like looking, because if it were me, I would be on ultra hyper alert and almost maybe in a flow state where my skill level is maybe higher, because to get to that place you have to have a higher skill level, but also the difficulty is higher too, because you're talking about split seconds of things happening. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm. It's funny that you talk about kind of hyper focused or hypersensitivity. Like you certainly can't be, I guess the word I would use is scatterbrained when it comes to a lot of things where there's a lot going on. Because if you're looking in 50 different directions trying to find a moment, you're not going to see anything. You're just going to see chaos in every direction. It's more like looking through like a Where's Waldo book. You can't just like glance around the page and zigzags. There might be like you're scanning left to right in little lines or whatever until eventually you find something, and you can kind of focus. When you find your Waldo, you focus on it. If I'm at a Willie Nelson concert, I'm not looking at the crowds and moving back and forth or whatever. I choose an angle that I think is going to work, and I wait. There's actually a lot of patience involved with with a lot of the work I do, and it's a necessary skill, I guess, is patience, because you are looking for these moments, but you're not going to find them by running in 50 different directions at one time. It's very much a patience game.
It's fascinating that you talk about being stressed beforehand and in that moment, because when we are in that situation, we have obviously adrenaline and cortisol gets released into your body, and that actually helps us focus, doesn't it? And that we end up in a hyper focus moment where we're really totally in the zone of concentrating about where I should be, where I'm pointing, um, where do I need to go next, and you're following yourself, and you've got your eyes wandering around everywhere, scanning. That actually the bit of stress there is really quite helpful to creating this hyper focus, isn't it?
I guess based on my career choice, I just seem to work incredibly well under immense pressure. Sometimes it's fabricated pressure that I put on myself, but pressure does help me work a lot.
I'd love to just circle back to something about this, that you said that you're an introvert, and you love being extroverted with your camera in this situation and work. I think I understood that right. Maybe correct me if I've got it wrong. I was really interested in that because I feel that too, and I find that when I put my work hat on, and this doesn't, whether it's a creative work hat or a photography work hat or a teacher's work hat, when I actually have the responsibility for work, I can be a different person, and I can put on this um, extrovert behavior and go up and walk up to anyone and say hello, and start organizing or asking them whether I can take a photo and all those sort of things. And then when I'm not in that role, I become the wallflower, and I'm sitting over there in the corner, uh, hiding away. And it actually gives me permission to um, be much more extroverted. So I was just wondering, because it sounded like such a similarity to you when you were talking about that earlier.
That's absolutely true. I certainly do not go out of my way to talk to strangers when I'm not on the clock, right? Like I said before, like Bree's pretty much like my only friend that I talk to regularly in Austin, because I don't go out to meet people. Like I don't go out and talk to people. I don't actively try and pursue friendships with anyone. When I'm at work, I no problem with that badge, with my press badge hanging around my neck. I will go talk to anybody and everybody. And circling back to the topic we're on, that's often like step one to finding the decisive moment is, certainly stepping out of my comfort zone and talking to people that I normally wouldn't want to talk to. And, just putting me either uncomfortable situations or new situations just to get those images I want.
So it all piles up into more intense creative moments, doesn't it?
It does.
You know, that's kind of funny. This has nothing to do with the decisive moment, but I'm completely the opposite of you guys. In fact, Aaron, I don't even actually know how we're friends, except I make steak for you sometimes because we're completely opposite. Like, in fact, when I am like normal, I'm like, woohoo, bubbly, like everybody come and hang out with me. But when I'm doing photography, I actually just want to be by myself. I like don't want anyone to bother me. I just want to go completely in my head, which is, I mean, maybe that's what a lot of us do, you know. But anyway, I just think it's interesting how so many people, there's so many different kinds of personalities that do this work. I was also thinking when it comes to this, because we've talked a lot about all these different ways that these moments, right? We've decided they're moments. There's not like one ever, like the one. I'm wondering how that translates to different artists, because I was thinking, like, for me, if I was like writing poetry or, writing something like a poem, and I have done this before, not a lot lately, but I might be a little stuck on like a part of it, and I might have an experience that triggers the creation of the finishing. And I sometimes feel like that was the moment that I needed to then do the work. And I think that there are a lot of these kinds of moments that can trigger the creativity or the creation part of anything that we do. So, and I was wondering how that translates. I'd be interested to hear from like painters or musicians, more musicians, how that would translate. Len, you're like an artist. I mean, I know you could do different kinds of art. Have you seen how this could translate into that other kind of work?
I think, yes, of course. So much of it is about headspace, isn't it? And getting to that right headspace, and then making decisions. There's actually a moment where you make the decision, isn't there?
It sounds like the decisive moment isn't necessarily the final place. It could be a step along the way.
Yeah, definitely. And you come to terms with it, and you go, "Oh, I need to be," or in your case, standing over there, or I need to change my lens. Um, i- in a painter's case, it might be, I want to try this color, and you start adding, and you start adding something, and it might work, and it might not work, and then there's that other decision making: do I continue with it, or step away and go in a different direction? So it could be considered that there's a whole series of them, one after the other, of these decisions that we have to go through to get to these artworks, and whether the artworks is a performance or a painting or a drawing or a photograph, that doesn't really matter. The There's so many similarities in the way that we work, and I think, interestingly, our own mental state will produce different artworks at different times, even with the same in it. Like, it's impossible to have the same ingredients, but us as being an integral part of that process, being in a different state will actually change what we would do. So what I would do today would be different to what I would do tomorrow, given the same set of situations. I find that fascinating.
I do too. I think that's super interesting because I have seen how my mood affects me. Um, I was also thinking with this decision making that, like, Aaron, I just want to I'm going to pull up on my phone actually, when I do all the posting of this. So I'll find some of these images that we're talking about and make sure that we share them. Aaron, there's one back in, and you and I had a conversation about this. It's this pregnant girl, and do you remember what it says?
Yeah, I know which photo you're talking about. So for context, I was at a pro abortion rights rally, just a rally to people were protesting, and this woman was several months pregnant. She had a good size belly on her, so she was I would say between 7 and 9 months, but she had "My Body, My Choice" written on her stomach. Is that the one you're talking about, Brie? Yes, it is.
Yeah, this one. And I remember you telling me, because I was asking you, oh my goodness, was she just like that? And you told me, no, I asked her to do that. And I think a lot of times when we talk about, like in photography, we talk about the decisive moment. It's when all of the elements externally line up. But I feel like this is it. This is partly what we're talking about, is making a decision about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess in the definition of decisive moment, the key word there is decisive, right? I guess, like we said, the decisive moment isn't necessarily the result. It could be, in this case, choosing to talk to this woman, asking her to do this pose. The decision to talk to her and the decision to instruct her on how to pose for that photo, that was a decisive moment that made the frame. I guess coming into this, I was almost thinking of the decisive moment again as like an end goal, like a physical photo or painting or whatever. But it's certainly more of a step in the process towards getting a final product or final image or painting or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think that image tells a really big story, and yeah, it's really interesting.
I have an interesting question for you, Aaron, and that's about how much of you and your beliefs and views and politics and all that, how much of you actually comes through in your work, do you think? Like you just said, "Oh, I asked her to pose in a particular manner," so that's what triggered that question.
In that particular case, it is purely an aesthetic thing. Being a photojournalist, I like to think that you could look at all the work I've produced as a photojournalist and you cannot pinpoint where I stand on any particular topic. That is my personal goal. When it comes to being a photojournalist, I try to keep myself out of my work as much as possible. I if I can look at my work and you can clearly figure out where I stand on certain issues or topics, I think I would need to improve as a journalist, because I do try to approach everything from a totally neutral ground, or at the very least, avoid my personal beliefs or politics or anything showing up in my work.
It's interesting because we talk about having, putting ourselves into our art. And this is and I can attest that he definitely, I've seen a lot of his work. It's not one way or the other, for sure. And I do think that's interesting that is your goal, to have neutrality, right?
Mhm.
It's because it's purely about what the story and what's happening.
And it's not necessarily that I'm trying to be neutral. I don't know if I would word it that way, but
Mm.
you know, even every journalist on the planet has beliefs and biases and political beliefs, but in my opinion, the good ones, you can't figure out what those are through their work. And that's how I see it.
Mm. I'm actually giving a presentation later today, and it's on windows and mirrors. That minor white concept about how much of the work is a mirror back about who you are as yourself, and I also think in there's a mirror for the viewer as well. But that's another whole thing. And then how much of it is a window out into the rest of the world, and I think it's impossible not to be involved in your work at all, and that it's a goal, but it's something that even as I look through your work, I can see you in it, and I get a sense of what sort of person you are um, from looking at the work. Now, maybe I'm imagining that, uh, and I also understand that as a journalist, you're trying to record, to document, to share, to tell the truth. But truth is so subjective, isn't it? Like the three of us, we're all here together, and each of us will have our own little truth, and we actually all have a different memory of what happened and a different story, and we'll see it all through our own rose-colored glasses. And it's a really interesting and fascinating component of photography, isn't it? And today, photography still, even though it's sort of failing at this point in some ways, but is still held up as the medium of truth, isn't it? Truth telling as the storyteller.
Yeah, that's interesting because that is changing, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of discussion in our community about what is real and what is not when it comes to photography. And in fact, this has nothing to do with the decisive moment. However, maybe it does. Len likes it when I throw these things out. So a friend of mine posted a YouTube video all about AI and how that's changing. And that is, it's based on reality, but nothing about it is real, right? And I just think that's interesting. So when we go to those places, then truth becomes absolutely subjective at that point. Did I just stop the conversation talking about AI work? By the way, because this is fun, Aaron and I we're planning a trip with some other friends. We're planning a photography trip, so he came over to test out some things. But he's actually in my house, in my husband's office, with our other equipment. So I'm in one space and he's in another space,
Yes.
and Len is all the way in Australia. So anyway, I just wanted to say that because I think it's actually kind of fun.
Aaron, I want to ask another question. And before air, we were talking about how many photographs you're taking at the moment, and Bree's been saying how much your work is changing and growing, and over that time. And I wanted to clarify those things and talk about them.
What about them exactly?
Well, listen, wait, hang on. I tell you all the time that your work is getting better, and you're like, I don't know. And in fact, you were like, oh, it's just a quantity. It's just a quantity thing. So I want to know for real. I want to know for real, like you make a lot of images. You can share how many you've done for work. And if you truly see your work improving.
I sure hope so.
Over time.
Right now, as things are going, you are never going to get me to admit that I think I'm doing something right.
Okay, Aaron, we've got two of us here. We're going to gang up on you, and we're going to tell you quite straight out your work is improving, and it's improving in leaps and bounds, and it's just absolutely amazing what you're doing at the moment, and it's a stunning work. And the reason I was asking that question is because I think throughput, how much you're actually out doing your art, has a huge impact on how well you do it. And the improvement that you're showing, in my opinion, is because you're out doing it every single day, taking as many possible photographs and working so hard at it. You're living, breathing, totally immersed in it. And I think that's a absolutely incredible thing. And to see it in your work, like, it's obvious to us too. Wake up. and your work is improving, and it's amazing. I think your work's stunning. I love it. I absolutely love it.
I do appreciate that. Just for some quick context, I do take about 150. I'm going to be averaging 150 to 200,000 frames a year at this point. And back to that, our talk about the decisive moment. That number would be a lot lower if I didn't decide to get out of bed on days I didn't want to get out of bed. For example, some days my decisive moment is choosing to get out of bed, right? And I'm sure you know exactly what that's like.
Definitely. Oh, definitely.
Oh, we all have those moments, like sometimes we just don't feel like it. Actually, I was going to ask you a question along those lines. Has there ever been a time that you, and I know the journalistic work you do is like all on assignment, but has there been a time that you've gone out on assignment or whatever, for work to do this, and you don't feel like it's coming? You don't feel like you're getting it.
Pretty much like at least once a week. You know, sometimes I get to a place for whatever it may be. It could be a political rally, it could be, covering the legislature, a concert, whatever. And I could just be, completely out of the groove, struggling to create photos. Like there are times where I walk around places muttering to myself, one more photo, one more photo, one more photo. And, you know, in that context, sometimes I guess the decisive moment is the moment it clicks and you get into your groove and stuff starts working, right? For me, sometimes that's if I'm at an event and I just can't seem to make a photo. Like sometimes that first frame I take, good or bad, is like step one towards a successful day. Just deciding to take a photo, whether I like it or not. Because for whatever reason, for me, the first frame is always the hardest one for me to take. And the second I get that out of the way, I'll either fall into the groove or I won't. But at least, it's a start.
So have you got into the habit of just taking that first photo, knowing that it's going to be no good?
Yep. Sometimes I might just dumb it down to the simplest thing. I'm looking for, a really basic composition. It doesn't have to be fancy. It just, something to get me started. And at the very least, it's a good reference. Like, okay, my first photo's out of the way. I look at it, I'm like, okay, I don't like it, but maybe I would like it if I did this. And that it's at the very least my step one towards a productive day.
I was wondering if this is going to be totally meta. Okay. So I was wondering if you ever were somewhere and you didn't feel like it, right? Like you were having just one of those like off days, and then you made an image or a set of them that you were like, yes, this is it. Like, meaning maybe these are some, just like a set of decisive moments or something that you knew was going to be really great. And then maybe that is the decisive moment. See what I'm saying?
Strangely enough, some of my better work is often produced on days where I want nothing to do with the camera. I do not want to be there. I don't, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, or, the day's not going well. An example would be a young lady named Margot that I photographed for Dia de los Muertos last year. Literally created 5 images that day because I was just not feeling it. And, happened to run into her, asked her to pose for me, and got probably my favorite portrait I've ever taken. Even though I absolutely,
and it's mine too.
I just,
it's my favorite.
Absolutely didn't want to be there. But that's another decisive moment, was just seeing her and deciding to approach her and talk to her and ask her to take her photo. That's all it took for me to go from, today sucks, this is boring, why am I here, I don't want to be here, to damn, I just got the best portrait I've ever taken.
Don't we do this to ourselves a lot as artists? Kind of, we can't all have those days where we're super motivated and energized and all of that stuff. I mean, I have my caffeine right here, and I know Aaron has his too, but we can't all have those. That's right. Here, I'll do mine too. So we can't all have those days where we're, just exuberant and positive. And, there are going to be those days that we've planned to do whatever creating we're going to do, and it doesn't feel great. And we're really not interested in doing it. And we go and do it anyway. And sometimes we come away like your Margot. By the way, it's a gorgeous image. We'll share that one. Can we share that one, by the way? We can share that one, right?
That one's mine.
And, yeah, okay, all right. It's public on Instagram. So, and so sometimes we're going to come away with a beautiful image of Margot on Dia de los Muertos. Sorry, my Spanish is bad right now. And some days we're not going to be able to create anything. But I think it is important to go out and be able to just do what we say we're going to do anyway.
It's often seen as the difference between a professional and an amateur is a professional has to show up and start and get into gear and do it, whereas an amateur actually has the choice of rolling back over and shutting their eyes and going back to sleep. And one of my favorite quotes in this is Picasso, actually, and he says, the hardest thing about creativity is showing up every day for work or to paint, to be creative. And the showing up part, when it's not your job, and you have to clock in and all those sort of things, can be an incredibly hard part of the day. And then once you get there, once you do show up and you take that first step, and in your case, you're talking about pressing the shutter and taking that first photo, uh, things start to unfold, and you can move yourself into a better place and into that creative space. And as a professional, you know that, and you go, right, okay, I'm just going to go and start, and you get into it much quicker. And then as someone that's choosing to be there, uh, again, there's all these little decisive moments all the way up to, yeah, I'm actually going to start taking that first photo, taking that first frame. I had it yesterday, actually. I was teaching, and I was teaching people abstract art and how to make abstract photographs. And we went outside with our cameras, and there was this blockage. Like, well, what are we going to do here? And as soon as you actually, like one of the ways I teach is by demonstration and diving in and come on. Oh, what about if we take a photo of this and that, and then try and put them together and see what happens? And the actual act of doing creates the momentum that turns into the magical creativity. And within half an hour, we hadn't moved more than 10 meters from where we sort of think, oh, well, what's here to photograph? And we hadn't moved more than 10 meters, and yet we'd found a push bike and we'd been photographing that, and then some plants and a tree and some cars, etc., etc. And we were totally immersed, and we didn't leave there for an hour and a half. But we were blocked at the beginning, like, oh, it's too hard. We can't get there.
I want to pop in for a second and with my little coachy hat on here, because one of the things that I know, and I coach myself around this too, is maybe not naturally, but I think when we're starting, there's going to naturally be some resistance to some things and some thoughts we have in our heads, like, I don't know, how is this going to turn out? I'm not sure. I'm maybe we have all kinds of stuff, like, I don't think I'm good enough to do this work, I'm stressed, whatever is swirling around in our heads. There's always going to be just a little resistance, and this happens for me a lot, that I'll go to do something, like, it could be I'm starting a trip. I know that when I go to a place like White Sands, even the place I love, I pull up and I'm like, why am I here? What am I doing? And I know I'm just naturally going to feel some resistance. And I think that's totally fine. I think it's important to just say, yeah, I'm feeling some resistance about this right now. And I'm just going to start. I'm going to be okay, experiencing that. And then I'm just going to go to work. Like Picasso said, like you said, Len. I think when we think that there's something wrong because we feel the resistance, that's where we create some problems for ourselves. But I think just recognizing that, like, there is going to be some resistance. We do have to decide to take that first photo, Aaron, right? And then just keep, moving forward, because it does get easier.
And that certainly makes me wonder, like, is there, especially in terms of the creative process, is there truly a decisive moment, or would you consider it more of a series of decisive moments leading up to some final thing?
I mean, obviously it's a series. I mean, when you're looking at a photograph or a painting or whatever it is that was created, you can go, oh, at that time, there was this moment that helped me create that, right? But maybe there are multiples of those. Like, I think even in my life, like, there's no way, how did I end up in this room talking on this microphone to you two fabulous people on this podcast. I mean, how many moments did I have to get, like, did we all have to get to this place? I mean, think about it, like all the little things I had to line up so that we all three were here together, and I think it's so fascinating to think about that. When we make decisions, these can sometimes be little or they can be big. Like these things, sometimes they just matter. And it's so fascinating to think about how these things all come together to do that. It's awesome, actually.
That's one of the reasons why we always talk about flow. We talk about in creativity as being in a mind state rather than decision after decision after decision and focusing on those. But what we're trying to get into is this state where you're producing lots and lots of work and it's flowing out of you. And I love that metaphor for doing that.
I do too. And I love thinking about the decisions I've made to get me to that place where I can experience that, or where I can really enjoy my creative work, And I actually was going to talk about maybe like, what do you do when you go to, like, Aaron, you talk about a lot of your work is on assignment, but do you ever go just downtown and walk around? I can't, I don't necessarily see you doing that, but maybe.
Sometimes it's, I pitch an idea, or if there's nothing on our list of things to do for the day, sometimes it's just go run around and look for something interesting, or try and find some, it's essentially called feature hunting. We're looking some kind of little feature or whatever, and we're just pretty often just running around trying to find something interesting, right? It's not always, not all of our work is assigned to us. There is a lot of initiative to go out and look for stuff because it's our job.
Yeah, and go to find those things. Ooh, I like that. I like the idea of a hunt. We're kind of, it's like a treasure hunt.
I mean, every photographic outing is a treasure hunt.
When you get home or back to office with all these amazing images, is that also a treasure hunt going through them?
Yeah, because that's when you find out that there's a lot of trash that you thought was treasure.
Same.
And what about the ones? Do you have ones that you think are treasure? That you think are trash? Sorry, and they turn out to be treasure.
Oh, absolutely. Every time I shoot a sporting event, for example, I might shoot a series, of someone running, a running back running through a line, or soccer players, whatever. I might, I'm shooting so fast, I don't have time to process what's being captured, right? So, when it comes to sports, a lot of times I go back to the workroom, like totally oblivious to whatever I just shot, because I have no idea what could be on the card. Because, I just can't process the photos fast enough. So I would think of it as almost like panhandling for gold, right? You grab your pile of dirt and rocks, whatever, and then you're sifting through it when you get back. You don't know that there's gold in there, but there is gold in there. Or maybe there's not.
And is it your decision, or is it also the editors have a part of the decision-making process?
So when it comes to what I turn in, it's purely my decision. But then, it gets narrowed down further. If for example, in print, if I go to a sporting event and turn in, 100 photos, they're not going to print 100 photos in the paper. They might use one or two. So it's funny that when you talk about that final image that made it in the paper, there's 500 moments and, half a dozen people that between when the photo is taken and when it gets to print, right?
It's quite a huge process. What's floating through my mind right now is to ask you, because you have the most incredible, beautiful landscape photography, and my passion for trees is sparked looking at some of your work too, and also my new interest in astrophotography that I haven't quite materialized yet, and I want to put those two together, trees and astro, obviously.
Really?
Yeah, that's in my future one day.
All right, I'm interested.
These things that we're talking about in your creative business life as an employee, as a photojournalist out on the streets and working that way, how do these translate across to this other part of you that's doing this beautiful, absolutely beautiful creative work that's just for you? for your own pleasure?
Strangely enough, I think the two have a lot of similarities. There's a lot of passion, there's a lot of hard work behind them. I do enjoy it, but I would imagine that my work as a photojournalist, it's just, I'm at 1,000 miles an hour at all times. And then when it comes to my personal work, it's like a lazy walk, I guess, in terms of pace. But, my personal work is just that it's very personal. It's, every time I take a frame, it's because I wanted to and because I enjoyed it, not because I needed to at any point.
Mm.
I'll attest to that. He's very deliberate in what he does. And I would say that you do very limited photography. Like I know we went we went to East Texas and I don't know how many, and you were like, "Oh, I only have this many." I'm like, "How do you even make a photograph if you only have this many photos?" Because he's very deliberate and I love that.
Even like amongst my coworkers and I, like by comparison, like you think 150,000 frames a year and you're like, that's a lot of photos. But, I've worked alongside my coworkers and it's like, oh, this football game, I shot, 1,700 frames over the day. And one of my coworkers is like, oh, well, I shot 9,000. Like even amongst my coworkers who are also in this fast paced field shoot considerably more than I do. And, it's, when it comes to my personal work, the main difference is I like to really work slow. Even my most recent purchase as far as gear acquisition goes was a Fuji medium format. It shoots a whopping like 0.95 frames per second. I have it on single shot mode because there's no reason to have it in burst mode because it's so slow. But I just enjoy working very slow when it comes to my personal work.
Mm.
I think I'm seeing a trend here that I like to connect things and figure out how I can replicate doing this work. And it seems to me that one of the qualities that we want to have when we're trying to achieve these decisive moments in our work is just patience, being able to wait, setting ourselves up ahead of time, right? Like the technical skills, maybe being and we don't really know if we're in the right place at the right time until it happens, right? But putting ourselves in a certain situation that maybe we feel works, and then just having the patience. I know you mentioned that early on, Aaron, that just waiting instead of running around, just waiting and being patient, and just noticing. And what's the difference? Like when you're there and you're waiting, how do you know when just to like press that button or to,
If I
how do you know?
if I knew when to press the button every time, I would be way more famous than I am now. See, I don't know.
Bullshit. That's not. Fame
No, like-
has got nothing to do with how your quality of your work is. So
famous.
Let's separate
would-
those two out.
I would
for
be
a start.
much. I would think that the quality of my work would be much higher if I knew when the perfect time to press the shutter button was every single time.
Well, I don't see that. I see really beautiful work, and I think it's gorgeous. And people that are famous are really good marketers.
That's true. I retract my
Bottom
use of the
line.
word famous.
Okay.
Well,
So
he does
your work is
take a
as
lot of
good-
photos of he does take a lot of photos of Willie Nelson, so maybe some of that fame will rub off on you.
Your work is as good as anyone else's out there, and it's absolutely stunning. And so you've got to stop comparing and actually, because you say you make it for yourself, so that's a really special thing. I'm actually staring at 3 sets of triptychs of trees on your Instagram thing.
Okay.
And I wanted to ask you, what led you to making triptychs and putting these ones together, and how do you decide which ones to put together?
So I
There's a
believe
decisive moment. How do you decide?
I think you're referencing our last trip to Caddo Lake. Caddo.
Yes.
Sorry, Caddo. we were out there, and for some reason we got back after our first day of shooting, and we were, we're passing each other's cameras around and looking at each other's frames, and our friend Elise Bender was like, "Oh, you shot a lot of like nice tight shots of trees." She's like, "Why don't you just?" And she kind of like, "Oh, why don't you do like a series of like?" It's just like all these trees have so much character. Like you should just do a series of images like the characters avocado or something along those lines. Like, you know what, I could do a series of tree portraits that works for me. That's simple. That's, I believe, what you're referencing is those sets of images was just doing tree portraits, I guess is the way to put it. Very much like Brie likes her rocks, I like interesting trees, I guess, in some cases. Even though I grew up in a desert where there were no trees, I do like interesting trees. And he asked, how do you pick which ones to include in these? It's kind of like I was trying to choose photos that kind of were similar to each other, I guess, in a way, or that, and I don't know how to describe it, but I pair these trees up, and it's someone's like, okay, these two don't work side by side or something. It's just something about the three sets or the three trees in each of those little things that just they seemed to look good together, and I wish I could explain why.
I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron. This work looks it looks very similar to some of your other work, because I've seen you do a lot of portraits.
Well, they're taken by the
And
same person.
so it's well, yeah, of course. But I'm just saying, like, just because there's landscape and then the other, your other subjects are people, there's a lot of similarities here, right? And I think that's interesting to lean into
There are a lot of
what we
similarities.
love and what we are good at. Yeah.
Even in process, like for example, we were just talking about patience. If I'm shooting the portrait of a tree, for example, I'm waiting for the right light, or maybe for some fog to clear, or if there's on Kato, if there's a boat passing by, I need to wait for the boat to pass. Same thing if I'm shooting a press conference, I'm standing in one spot waiting for a particular facial expression or for some kind of hand movement or something. It's very much the same process, and I guess because it's just the way I shoot, it's not surprising that a portrait of people might be very similar to a portrait of some trees.
It's a beautiful metaphor to think about tree photography as portraiture. And particularly, I could do a lot of flowers. I think of it the same way. Landscape and rocks can fit into that. So I think that's an incredibly beautiful metaphor to frame them about that. And what you're describing as a process is like setting yourself up with the object, the subject, and the background, and framing that all up, and then waiting for all the conditions to be right and that's when you take that photograph. It's interesting because that's a technique that a lot of street photographers use as well. And as a landscape photographer, I use that too. Like, where do I go to set up the right background for the subject that I'm actually going to be working with? And then I wait in the same way. And it's like hunting, that idea that you almost in from a hide is rather than wandering around. But sometimes I also like to just wander and see what I come across. Another little point there is a really beautiful metaphor about putting works together is conversations and storytelling. And I think when you put these together, the portraits of each of the trees that you've got here, and they start having a conversation with each other about hue. So sometimes you use a similar color across the three frames to tie them together, and sometimes it's about mood or a tonal arrangement. So you use a similar tonal arrangement, but sometimes you use a contrasting one as well. What you're doing, in my opinion, is that you're setting up conversations in storytelling. And it's really beautiful. And it is so similar to being a journalist and an artist. I don't really think we should be drawing demarcation lines in that, because I think what we've got here, we're looking at really beautiful art, no matter what it is, a portraiture, reporting, and trees, nature. Beautiful.
It is beautiful. Well, I think, Aaron, is there anything else that you want to add? I think I think a lot, let's talk about the decisive moment when Len and I are recording. It's like all of a sudden a feeling I have like, okay, the conversation, it feels full, right?
Well, I
don't know if you feel like that.
I think we've come to the conclusion that there is very rarely a decisive singular moment. It's often a collection of decisive moments leading to the creation of something, whatever that may be, as a painter, as a photographer, even as a writer, at the very least, I think the listeners will now be incredibly confused about what exactly a decisive moment is.
100%. Sorry, folks. No, seriously, we really hope you enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed kind of picking it apart because this is not a big conversation that I've had before, but it's been so interesting to hear from you as someone who is a photojournalist and does this day after day after day and is out there and experiencing all of these things. And I think it's interesting for us as artists to consider how all of our decisions impact our art in such different ways, and how those decisions contribute to what we create. And I personally think it's fascinating to think about, and I really appreciate, Aaron, that you came on and shared this time with us. Really beautiful work. Thanks for letting us compliment you like crazy.
I don't know if I let you, but
No, we force it upon you. It's all good.
for saying I let you would imply that I had a choice in the matter.
Right.
Oh, that's why we're having an affair.
Oh no.
Yes, that's right.
That's right. That's
Very,
right.
very complex and it's so hard to describe adequately. And, I think we've actually had quite a really good discussion about the decisive moment. And just to remind you that everybody, that Cartier-Bresson was talking about composition and bringing all these elements together and lining them all up and getting this sense that it feels just right in this balance. And we actually talked about that under everything there. And we've also talked about when we press the shutter, and those sort of things as well. And it's been so, so lovely to talk to you and immerse ourselves in your work. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for adding so much more understanding to the process of creativity. On that note, we all need to say goodbye.
It's nice to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you for joining us in our creative affair. If you love the passion we bring to this creative content, please support the podcast by sharing with a friend, subscribing, and leaving us a review. To find out more about Bree's work, including her gorgeous photography and mentoring in her Creative Confidence Group Coaching Program, please visit her at creativemindscoach.com. If you'd like to learn more about creative photography, you can find me at lenmetcalf.com, where you can find links to my photography school, videos, and publications. I would so love you to sign up to my newsletter. Well, until next time, we hope you enjoy your creative life. It's time to say goodbye for now.